Hey, Expanded Universe fans, it's a new year, and there are many new universes to expand, to explore, to verse about, to multiverse about, to write verses about. Well, whatever. If you're not already subscribed to our Cinema Craptaculus channel, head on over to your favorite podcast platform and click that subscribe button. And while you're there, give us a rating and write us a review. As our producer and Craptaculus host Dave says, it helps get the Craptaculus word out. Each week, we bring you a brand new show with awesome guests. Our shows include B-Sides, Terror Tunnel, Real Debates, Cinema Craptaculus, and of course, the Expanded Universe, which is about to start now. Geek out! Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Cinema Craptaculus Presents the Expanded Universe, with your hosts John H. Ford, Mario Doc Diaz, and s'more. From movies to TV shows to toys to pop culture, this show is your safe space for all things geeky and where you can get your geek on. This is John H., and with me as always is my geektacular co-host,
s'more!
Wow, that was really loud. Are you compensating for the fact that we do not have Doc with us?
I'm trying to, recreate the trifecta we usually have, and hopefully it's working. So I'm trying to make myself sound bigger to compensate for it.
Sadly, Doc is not with us, so it's just going to be mano a mano, s'more, and Ford.
Bring it! Bring it on! Whoop, whoop.
Well, first of all, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, sir. Happy 2022.
First geektacular expanded universe of 2022, and I think this is now are we heading into our third year?
We're heading into year number 3, and I can't believe we're in the year 2022. We're in the future.
We are in the future. Well, this is the scary future, because I believe this was the year that Soylent Green, the 1973 sci-fi film with Charlton Heston, and about
Soylent
I don't want to spoil the
Green
ending about little
people.
You just ruined it. Just ruined it. For all our young listeners who are going to go back and watch it. Well, so in thinking about what we're going to talk about, obviously Spider-Man No Way Home is the big juggernaut film that somehow skirted through the pandemic surge and has made, $1.6 billion?
$1.6 billion worldwide. Without China, I might add. Without China.
Yeah. Huge, huge. And, kind of sucked all the oxygen in the cinematic world. But, it shows that people are willing to go to the cinema. And I think that...
Look, I'm all for safety and putting on the mask. You still should put on your mask, be safe. It's scary out there. I ventured to the theater. I did it. I want to see Spidey. I'm a big Spidey fan. I had to see him on the big screen.
It wasn't just a Spider-Man movie. It was kind of like the end of that Tom Holland trilogy, although we hear that he has been signed with Sony to do another trilogy. Tom Holland fans, he is not over. He's just too valuable to them right now to let him go. But it did kind of end that sort of storyline. And we're going to just talk about it because I think it has just shed the light on the huge prevalence, I don't know about popularity, but definitely prevalence of the what?
The multiverse! 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 Multiverse!
Oh my God! I think when I go to edit this more, I think I'm gonna get tinnitus from that.
Like I said, we have to go bigger. We're missing Doc. We have to go bigger.
This is a big one, and it is heartbreaking that Doc isn't here with us. And actually, it's to your advantage because I'm going to throw a quiz. We have not done our That's So Strange quiz in a while. So just to start things off, and we're going to get into not just the multiverse in the Marvel, we're going to get into DC and DC TV. I mean, multiverse is everywhere. Everybody is attempting it. Attempting it successfully remains to be seen. I'm going to start things off with a quiz.
All right. Bring it. Let's do it.
And if Doc were here, it would be no fair. He'd have to recuse himself anyway because he'd get all these, which isn't to say you won't.
All right. Give it a shot. I'm ready. Bring it.
It's time for another episode of That's So Strange. That's so strange. Well, thank you for joining us for another quick quiz of That's So Strange. We only have one contestant. It's S'more. But these are 5 questions that we're hoping he gets.
All right.
And it's going to help jumpstart the conversation on the multiverse. Question number 1. In next year's The Flash from WB, who do we know from the recent little teaser trailer that Barry Allen is visiting in another universe? And which actor is playing him?
The correct answer is Batman Bruce Wayne, played by one of the original Bruce Waynes, 1989's Batman, Michael Keaton.
You are correct. That was an easy one. But yes, if you'd seen the trailer, the narration starts out with this familiar voice, and it sounds like the Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming. And it is Michael Keaton, apparently bringing back Batman. And so, Ezra Miller is going to be integrating or interacting with Michael Keaton.
Is Michael Keaton's thing just birds? Like he did Birdman, he did the Vulture, he did Batman. He just likes birds.
Moving on to question number 2. In the season 1 finale of Loki on Disney+, the characters Loki and Sylvie met with the One Who Remains, a.k.a. Whatever that version of Kang is, for people who know who Kang is. And he's going to factor in more later on in more Marvel content. And he remarked at one point during the finale, it is happening, or, it is beginning. I can't quite remember. What was he referring to according to some of the fans, and why?
Well, for those who know Kang, people know that Kang and the One Who Remains, or as I like to call him for the comic book geeks, Immortus, they're time travelers. They also go to alternate realities and alternate universes. What he was referring to when he said his beginning was the main timeline of the MCU had begun to fracture, meaning that the timeline has fractured into several different realities. In other words, the multiverse has returned to the MCU.
Well, you may or may not be correct.
What?
You may be correct in what you're saying. Although technically, didn't the multiverse happen the minute Loki created the variant and everything? We don't know. But according to the fans, and maybe I should have been a little more clarifying, a fan theory is that what he was actually referring to, if you line that episode up with the finale of WandaVision, it was Wanda becoming the Scarlet Witch. And that may be in and of itself what's fracturing the multiverse. But I'll give you the answer. You're probably answering it correctly, but it technically wasn't the one I was going for.
Gotcha.
Question number 3. In the CW's crossover event, Crisis on Infinite Earths, why did Brandon Routh's Superman appear to be so angry and depressed and bitter?
Whew. Okay. This one that I know Doc would have nailed. So my DC fandom isn't as strong as my Marvel fandom, although I do watch all the shows. And if I remember correctly, he was bitter because in his reality, I believe he lost Lois Lane to Lex Luthor.
Okay, you're very close.
Okay.
You're very close. He did lose Lois Lane, and I think he may have lost Jimmy, if I recall. But it wasn't to Lex Luthor. It was actually to Batman. And in that universe, the Batman, Bruce Wayne, played by Kevin Conroy in a rare human appearance or live action appearance, was a very broken and embittered and twisted version of himself. And I guess he had to set off a bomb or something, and it killed all those. So that's
right.
Yep.
Okay.
And Brandon was great. Great to see him back in that. It was a good little highlight. Here's a bonus question, since we're still in the world of the Arrowverse Crisis saga from, I don't know, was that 2019 or 2020? I can't remember.
Right. When
John Cryer's Lex Luthor visited Smallville on Earth, the Earth with Tom Welling as Clark Kent and Erica Durance as Lois Lane, why was Luthor so disappointed when he met Clark in that little brief encounter on that Earth?
Oh, man. Was it because Clark was just a farmer and not doing anything else?
Yeah, but a little bigger than that. Like, what had Clark done? Like, what was different other than just being a farmer?
He was a family man. He didn't become Superman. Lazy?
I'll give it to you. He had, I guess, apparently given up his powers because Lex pulled out a little piece of kryptonite, and because he's going around killing all the Supermans around all the universes, and it didn't have an effect on him, and he was just so bummed and disappointed and called him a loser, because Clark gave it up so he could be dad. Question number 4.
Yes.
Who are the remaining DCU characters that we are aware of in the post-Snyderverse world? Who's got movies?
Flash.
Yes.
Wonder Woman. because it was just announced, and Aquaman.
I believe you are correct. One could say that Harley Quinn is part of that because she got her own movies, but we don't know what's going to happen with the Suicide Squad crowd. Sure. Although there was a recent premiere of the Peacemaker series on HBO Max, is it, with John Cena?
John Cena, yeah.
And actually got good reviews. Okay, last question, because we need to talk about this stuff.
Yes.
What actor is apparently in next year's Flash, and what character was he rumored to maybe have been asked to reprise in the MCU in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness?
I'm going to go on a limb here. I'm going to say it's Ben Affleck, who is reprising his Batman character and was asked by the MCU supposedly to play Daredevil, the man without fear.
Wow, I think you got like 4 out of 5 correct.
4 out of 5.
So why all these multiverses? Why are they doing this? Why?
Well,
don't say money.
Oh, okay, you cut me off at the pass.
There's many ways to make money. Why are they all doing it?
Putting money aside, I'm going to give them the creative benefit of the doubt story-wise. For Marvel, I just feel that they can use this as an opportunity to unite all of the Marvel films that have ever been created in different studios under one banner. Spoilers for No Way Home, they've done that.
I think at this point we should assume anybody listening has seen
screw it, you're
No
right.
Way Home.
They brought all 3 Spider-Men together. The Sam Raimi Sony Spider-Man and the Andrew Garfield Sony Spider-Man. They brought them all together.
And their villains.
And almost all their villains. And I believe that Marvel has broke that formula of, all right, we've had all these different movies. We've been going back and forth with the rights. Let's just incorporate everything into a multiverse of madness. So I think in story, that's why they're doing it.
Okay, I'll give you that. Okay, so the people that got there first were the CW Arrowverse people.
Yes.
So they did their Crisis on Infinite Earths first. Doesn't mean that Marvel and even the DCEU were contemplating it. And actually, we should probably put the DCU in with the CW people because in that Crisis crossover, the various sort of characters that popped up, the Barry Allen from that TV show met up with, and it was a surprise cameo. They really kept it secret well with Ezra Miller's Flash, and they both complemented each other's costumes. And it seemed like, you know, when they pulled, we had Robert Wool from the 1989 Batman briefly. Right. I think they showed Dick Grayson. They had, what's his name? Burt Ward.
Burt Ward, Cameron Conroy, as you said earlier.
Right. And then the villain from that crossover event was going around knocking off these universes. So it was kind of their way of saying, we're going to destroy the 1989 Batman. We're going to pay homage to it for 2 seconds and destroy it. And so basically it seemed like a reaction a bit to having all of these iterations. And how do we explain that we've got a TV Superman on the heels of a previous TV Superman? And now we've also got a movie, big screen from Zack Snyder's Superman. And we've got a Joker on his own and a Batman from Justice League we've got a new The Batman, and totally separate. And it seemed like they said, look, all these iterations are valid because it's all part of a multiverse. Would you say it was sort of a house cleaning or more of a way to get around the craziness?
It's a good thing you said The Flash because my explanation ties directly into The Flash, and I'll tell you why. DC's concept of the multiverse, the way they're using it now across their media, I'm going to give them the credit, is actually brilliant. And here's why. The multiverse has always been inherent in DC lore, the golden age of comic books. Back in the golden age, around the 30s, they've had different characters, primarily because they bought different comic book characters from different companies. And they just simply explained them as they're in just different worlds. They didn't call it a multiverse. They just had different brands under one publishing banner. In 1956, and people might correct me out there, the fandom who loves The Flash, the Silver Age was introduced when Barry Allen was created. When they created Barry Allen, they had a problem. The problem was the Jay Garrick Flash still existed. Their explanation for that was, he's a part of a larger DC multiverse. That's when the multiverse was technically created for DC. And DC have used that banner of the multiverse ever since to justify the storylines, to fix up continuity errors, to bring in other publishers' comic books, i.e. Marvel versus DC, And this was their explanation for all the different comic book characters they bought from different publishers. Flash forward to 2018, 2019, when they did Crisis on Infinite Earths on the CW. That was Berlanti and his crew simultaneously paying homage to the DC history and cleaning up all the issues with different television programming and characters. This was Warner Brothers' brilliant use of something that already existed to sort of define what they're doing now.
And it helped them to launch stuff going forward, too. I think that was an appearance of, they showed the Titans, and they showed, I think there were some other characters that at the time hadn't quite debuted yet. But let's be honest, there was a lot of negativity around Zack Snyder.
Of course.
And it was before he was even, or around the time that HBO Max had given him money to finish his Justice League. So there was a lot of probably panicky WB execs who were thinking like, okay, other than Wonder Woman and Aquaman, we got a problem. And we're getting our butts kicked by Marvel. And how do we extricate ourselves out of the Zack Snyderverse if Gal Gadot's, Wonder Woman is still popular and vital? We've got her signed for more movies. Same with Jason Momoa. And Ezra Miller, that Flash film had kind of stalled for a while. Pandemic aside, they'd gone through a lot of iterations, but they still wanted to stick with Ezra Miller and the character from, the Zack Snyderverse. But I think with the CW show, they brought him in probably to maybe show that Ezra Miller's Barry is going to go through a similar sort of exploration of the multiverse. And it'll allow them to kind of cancel out some of the Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck stuff that, they want to move
which is
from.
why I give DC credit, because they brilliantly used something that was already in DC lore to clean up the messes that Warner Brother created.
It's kind of like a little bit of a ball cupping for the fans because, and J.J. Abrams did it essentially with his Star Trek reboot, where he knew that he did not want to tread on the hallowed grounds of the Shatner-Nimoy era of films, particularly. And by kind of having a skewed timeline, that version of Spock and that story of films that had transpired before that still exist, but we're now sort of entering into a separate timeline of Kirk's origin and his relationship with Spock that's new, rather than just having the balls to say we're going to just reboot.
Yeah, no, they played it both ways. They kept the timeline that old school Trek fans love, i.e. me, and they introduced this new timeline for a new generation. Or if you do like it, all Star Trek, you have that too. They have the best of both worlds.
We don't know what the Flash is going to do, but for instance, we know that Michael Keaton's Batman is, and part of how we enjoy films now is ruined by the fact that we read stuff. Our podcast is doing that. So how cool would it be if we didn't know that Michael Keaton was going to be in the next one? You just went to see The Flash. All of a sudden he goes to visit. So we ruin a lot of these. And so maybe they just know it's not going to be a surprise. So they just put it in the trailer. There's no way to keep a lid on it.
I agree. Yeah.
But it sounds like he's going to, exit the Ben Affleck Snyder world.
This could very well be exactly as you described it. It's like, hey, we're saying goodbye officially to the Snyderverse. Hello to the new whatever going forward. And they can still introduce, and they kind of have in the TV shows, the concept of the new 52, which is basically there's 52 main universes in the DCU. So they could reintroduce that in the films. Who knows? But I think, honestly, giving them credit is brilliant that they've done it this way, because they can pretty much clean up or cherry pick everything they've done in the past up until this point.
Let's pivot to the MCU.
Yes.
And I'm just going to say that I think, Loki is a show that is very pivotal because it literally tells us that everything that you see is part of a mechanization of time, of a timeline that is either planned or unplanned and has to be cleaned up. I understand that logic, and it's fun for Loki. The problem is Loki as a show doesn't exist in a vacuum. Everything is touched and interconnected in the MCU. And, for those of you who've watched it, that one of the first things we learn is that, the Infinity Stones, not a big deal. That timeline, there's multiple versions of how that played out. And that perhaps is what Doctor Strange saw. He saw the millions of versions in Infinity War. And those are all the different versions that the TVA just sort of keeps tabs on. But don't you think that it diminishes everything that led up to that now? If they can just say, it doesn't matter, or it mattered, but the TVA is kind of in charge of it all. I mean, what do you think?
Honestly, I think it's all about how they're going to approach it. Initially, I agree with you. The scene where they show the I guess, dozens of Infinity Stones that mean nothing. It's like, okay, wow, you just kind of said that the Infinity Saga for the MCU kind of didn't really mean much. But I trust what they've done so far as production goes and the general story. And I'm going to assume that there is a larger thing going on here that won't invalidate everything we've seen before, but rather enhance it. I think they kind of touched upon it in the What If series. I'm not sure if you guys all caught that, but in the last episode, they basically formed a Universal Avengers team to take out Ultron, who had the Infinity Gauntlet. But he had an Infinity Gauntlet that affected all of the universes. So maybe there's a bigger Infinity Gauntlet out there. I don't know what the master plan is, but I suspect that they're going to do something that will justify everything we've seen.
Hey, we'll be right back. And now, back to the show. Scaling it down to just sort of individual characters in this sort of broader storyline. And we know that just they've shown their hand at the MCU, at Marvel, that films we watch phase to phase are leading up to something. Now, possibly they'll never top the Infinity Saga, or nor maybe they're not trying, or maybe they think they can and go down into, Secret Wars or some other thing.
Right.
But taking it to the recent film. So Tom Holland is sort of a popular Spider-Man.
Yes.
But there are some people that felt that Andrew Garfield didn't really get a fair shake, and that even though The Amazing Spider-Man 2 disappointed people in some of the same ways that Spider-Man 3 did with Tobey Maguire and Sam Raimi directing, but they still felt that Andrew Garfield was a good Spidey and a good Peter Parker and wanted to see that continue. And No Way Home allowed... Because, Tobey Maguire got 3 films, and even though the third one was kind of like a wet fart that did well enough, he was supposed to get a 4th one. It didn't happen because they rebooted. But people were kind of okay with the Tobey era. Like, he certainly got his paychecks.
Yes,
But Andrew Garfield didn't. And this film, of course, allows Andrew Garfield fans some resolution. I kind of agree that he kind of stole all the scenes he was in, and he was funny. I mean, he's having a really good time in his career right now. He's probably going to get nominated for an Oscar, might win for Tick, Tick, Boom. Right. If you guys haven't seen it on Netflix, it's terrific. So he's a really dynamic actor. I don't know if we'll see him again, but does it kind of take away with what Tom Holland has worked towards with this film? If you bring in all these characters from multiverses, what does it say to those who own the role in the moment? If we're constantly, like Ezra Miller, that Flash trailer, I don't want to go back to DCU, but everybody was talking about Michael Keaton's voice. It's like, shouldn't we be excited about The Flash? Same with sort of Tom Holland. If it's sort of like his movie, why are we all talking about Tobey Maguire? And we got to see Willem Dafoe. And it kind of takes away from what they're doing. Or does it?
Again, I think it depends on several factors, including your level of fandom. I'm going to take myself, for example. When I saw No Way Home, and I kind of knew what was going to happen because, well, people like to spoil stuff all the time on social media. So I saw that coming. Still enjoyed it overall, but my initial, I won't say disappointment, because I had to watch the movie a couple of times and get myself into it. I had to let certain things go. But no, I didn't like the fact that you have all these other Spider-Man and all these other villains, because it took away from the Spider-Man of the moment, Tom Holland. I like his Spider-Man. I don't need comparisons to other Spider-Men to enjoy Tom Holland. With that, if you scale back and look at the grand tapestry of the MCU, of Marvel in general, and letting go of your specific fandom of Spider-Man, then you're excited because you're bringing in whole new elements and different elements that, say, you might have loved as a child or as a young adult that they've ignored up until this point. Now they can bring them all in. If you love the brand in general, then you'll love the fact that all these different versions and interpretations are now involved in this. And I think you'll have a better time.
We also feel like this was also a way to to manage another round with Sony, because the ownership of Spider-Man is just a problem for Marvel. And we were very lucky and happy with the fact that he was brought into the MCU in this sharing of him, where Sony controls the movies, but Marvel is in charge of the creative, and he's lent out for team-ups like, Captain America, Civil War, and the Infinity War saga films.
Yeah.
But it does kind of cause challenges, because, S'more, you brought this up when we were talking about it previously, that, we've now kind of been robbed, as far as we know, but up to this point, of seeing the Green Goblin, Harry Osborn from the MCU,
Yes.
of the Kurt Connors Lizard, of Electro, of Otto Octavius. I was always curious, like, okay, yeah, we loved Sam Raimi's take on Dr. Octopus and the arms and stuff, but that was 2004. What would they do now? What would the arms look like? Who would they cast? What would the Green Goblin on a glider be? And it's almost like, and maybe the MCU is aware of it, and they're kind of like, well, regardless, we wouldn't have had a say because Sony owns those characters. But yeah, now we don't get to see that.
Well, to your point, that was my initial disappointment when I first saw No Way Home. It's like, these characters are great from their perspective movies. I want to see the MCU version. I want to see, their take on it. And yeah, I do feel a little bit robbed of that. But again, looking at the bigger picture, yes, I believe that Marvel had to somehow work with Sony, and this was the best solution. And I think that solution was part of the reason why the general MCU is going the multiverse direction, because you now don't run into the problem of fighting for characters or character continuity or rights. But me personally, I want to see the MCU's versions of characters, not necessarily brought in from different universes.
Well, it definitely, I don't know if it helps or hurts a certain character's ability to charm us with his point of view about all of it, and which character I'm referring to.
It's funny that I only ever see two of you. It's almost like the studio couldn't afford another X-Man.
Deadpool!
McAvoy, Stewart, I can never keep track. Yeah, I mean, this is an opportunity for Deadpool now because he can sort of straddle all of the Fox and Sony and Disney and all of it.
Well, let's face it. That's why we like Deadpool. He's funny. He breaks the fourth wall all the time. He might be perfect to do this. He could be the new Stan Lee for the MCU going forward.
Right. Do you think that the multiverse was a factor or will be a factor in them bringing in mutants? Or do you think that doesn't matter because we're still in the same, that even though the multiverse is fractured, we have not seen Doctor Strange? And from what we kind of feel or hear, that's sort of the end of this trilogy. It was sort of like Loki, WandaVision, Spider-Man, or I guess quadrilogy, and then Multiverse of Madness kind of ends that and allows for things to go forward. I have not seen the Eternals, sorry, so I don't know. Maybe they address it in there. I'll get my Disney Plus on. But do you think that is going to continue, or do you think that they're doing it to sort of pull in elements like working with Sony and appeasing that world, maybe with Tom Hardy's Venom, and also the X-Men? What do you think?
I honestly think that Marvel, the MCU, is trying to have their cake and eat it too. And what I mean by that is, I believe they had a plan once they acquired the rights to all the other Fox characters to bring in mutants in a certain way. I also feel that, one of their biggest issues was Spider-Man. And I think they got together creatively and they went, okay, how do we solve our Spider-Man situation while at the same time introducing all these other characters we've just acquired and maintaining certain fan bases? Because we might talk about how disappointing the last few X-Men movies were, but there was still a huge fan base. I think this is their solution. We're going to introduce mutants our way, but the mutants that you grew up with or you liked, they're still there. They're just alternate realities. And from time to time, we will borrow from these realities to augment.
So you think we'll
reality.
See some of, I do not want to call it the
Singerverse?
The Singerverse. He shall not be named. No, I mean, do you think we will see that world pop up? I don't think we'll see Hugh Jackman.
No.
Although I think he could just show up as Hugh Jackman in a Deadpool sequel, because obviously there's a lot of people at Marvel that are probably, and when I say Marvel, I mean the Feige Marvel of the world we know, that are drooling to just do their version of Fantastic Four, which we know they're doing.
Yes.
X-Men is still a question mark. They have really been very cagey, and rightfully so, about what they're going to do and how they're going to bring in characters, who comes in, when, and how. I think one thing about the multiverse, though, I'm just talking about the MCU, because I feel like you're right. I think DC is at least embracing the DNA of the comics in this concept.
Right.
Marvel, I feel like the MCU is, and it's part of, I think, a broader problem with audiences and people, is we are not learning to say goodbye. We are not, we've abandoned trilogies.
Yes.
You get a character that has a 3-film contract. That doesn't mean they're done. It just depends on if there's more. And again, I know it's all about profit and all that, but I'm just saying there is something about letting go of characters. And we're kind of teaching our audiences that, it doesn't matter if Loki has a character arc. And he should have been viewed as a mass murderer. I mean, really, when you think about the Battle of New York, he redeemed himself in a way that seems kind of ridiculous. But he did. I mean, really, and he even went back to Earth with Thor to look for their dad. And it's like Hitler showing up out of nowhere on Central Park Avenue.
I swear I left him right here.
Right here on the sidewalk or right there where the building's being demolished? Great planning.
How was I supposed to know? Can't see into the future. I'm not a witch.
No? Why'd you dress like one?
Hey.
I can't believe you're alive. I saw you die. I mourned you. I cried for you.
I'm honored.
But anyway.
Yes, but he's charming as hell. Charming as hell.
And he's been falling for 30 minutes. But, Tom Hiddleston is very charming, and he's still young, and people wanted to see more of him. So they're like, aha, how do we do this? Well, he's technically dead at the hands of Thanos. Dead, no resurrections. But they said, hey, in the Endgame, that Loki disappears with the Tesseract. We can just start a new storyline. But he has to be the likable version. So in, the second episode or so, he watches a This Is Your Life newsreel of the events in that timeline. And wow, and he and Thor reconciled, and he became a hero. And all of a sudden he's kind of back to the version we like, so they can not miss a beat.
Well,
and I think that's a little unfair to the storytelling strength that characters end, their lives end. We have to let go.
And I agree with you. As a writer, I agree with you. Stories need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And characters need an arc. They need to grow. They need to thrive. They need to change. And ultimately, many of them need to die. That's good writing. However, I'm also painfully aware of how comic books work, how soap operas work, and how film franchises work, right? If you get a villain who's a bloodthirsty Hitler-esque monster, but the audience find him as charming as hell, I guarantee you they will find a way to redeem him and make him an anti-hero, or something happened to him which made him bad and he resolved it. So now he's trying so hard to be good. And that's ridiculous.
Loki is basically Stefano DiMera or Luke Spencer.
General Hospital fans. Yes. Stefan Cassadine. Somehow now they're trying to save Port Charles instead of freezing it.
You get into gray areas when you've got the Indiana Jones franchise, because that character is not based on a comic book. Yes, the character and the concept is based on old adventure serials that Lucas and Spielberg created, but it was Harrison Ford's kind of baby, and he aged with it, just like William Shatner did with Kirk. And, are we expecting that, he's going to die in the next film? I didn't want to see old Indiana Jones, not because I don't believe that we can't see older characters, just because I feel that character existed in the 1930s, in that window where you could kind of believe that the world was bigger than it was before World War II, before the atom bomb. And I know they kind of squeaked it a bit by keeping him in the 1950s with the fourth one. And he was still virile enough, I think, to kind of pull off a lot of it. Yeah. But now he's 79 when he films it. They've had reshoots, so God knows what the test audiences are seeing. And they kind of missed their window to sort of hand it off to a younger actor like Chris Pratt or whatever. I mean, I think they'll still do that eventually. But what was wrong with saying goodbye to Indiana Jones when he rides off in the sunset?
Well, the answer to that. The real world answer is there's too much money to be made. The fictional answer is something a little bit more ridiculous. And to your point, the reason I loved Indy is because Indy was a certain type of character that existed really well in a certain time period. The longer we continue with Indy as he ages and he goes through the decades, the more ridiculous the idea he becomes.
Oh, yeah. He's going to be 85 in 1972. I mean, it's like...
Right.
Yes, there were still jungles, but, we had satellites back then, so... Right.
Is he going to be bumbling during Woodstock somewhere, getting high on weed? And
I know Dave Humphreys is going to listen to this and go, you had to find a place to put in James Bond. But I think it's similar
I was waiting
to the challenges the James Bond franchise, I'll be quick, it faces, because you've got an anachronistic character from an anachronistic world with anachronistic behaviors and views, coming from sort of a patriotic viewpoint that is kind of anachronistic as the British Empire shrinks. So how do you move forward to that? Well, it may be, I don't want to spoil those who didn't see No Time to Die, but maybe that was where you just ended. And I'm a Bond fan, obviously. But we're getting off track here.
But see, this is what you do. You create a multiverse for James Bond. That was a different James Bond.
Oh, and that's how you have Harrison Ford interact, and you digitally recreate Sean Connery from 1962, and it's kind of like a paradox.
Oh, I
because
watched that.
Indiana Jones encounters the British Secret Service and meets James Bond on a mission, but he looks just like a young version of his dad.
Oh, I watched that. You telling me you wouldn't watch that? This is why they keep making it for us.
I think that mashups are fine. Okay, let's take like Cobra Kai. What would be really cool, I've talked about this, is if they took other characters from other 80s movies, if Sony had the rights to say Can't Buy Me Love or 16 Candles. And in season 5 of Cobra Kai, Daniel LaRusso meets up with a very successful character played by Patrick Dempsey, who was the guy from Can't Buy Me Love, and Johnny Lawrence hooks up with this guy. Like, what was your nickname? Oh, I was Ducky. Ducky, really? I mean, that would be cool. That's not a multiverse.
But would Johnny Lawrence call Marty McFly a chicken? And would they fight?
Well, you know what that's called? That's called an expanded universe.
Ah! Well played. Well played, John. Well played.
A few thoughts going forward, because there's so much conjecture, and then when we see the films, we're either proven right or proven wrong. I don't really need to see Robert Downey Jr. again as Iron Man, not because I don't like him, but because I thought that his exit was poignant. Yeah. It was moving. It was connected to the plot. It was story driven, and it allowed him to exit with dignity. And I'm sure the actor would agree, and exit with a very large wallet. But it's sad to think that if the Marvel films are going to just continue, that we're not going to see Iron Man, and they're going to just fill it with some young person or, a female Iron Man. And it's sort of like, we can't let go, but we have to keep the character going. So we're going to find sort of diluted versions on that. What do you think of sort of these younger replacements coming up?
Well, again, being a fanboy and having grown up on this stuff, yes, I have a hard time saying goodbye. I do think Iron Man went out gracefully. I think a lot of these characters have to move on, actors age, but the franchises must continue. I think that's part of the reason why Marvel has introduced their own multiverse, because at some point, if they really wanted to, they wanted to bring back Iron Man, they could bring a younger version from a different reality, or they can focus on a different timeline if they want to reboot the Marvel universe. But I look at it this way. It's like, as a fanboy and a guy who grew up on this, it pains me to see stuff like this because it's not the same. And I love these particular characters. But at the same time, we're getting to a point where these stories won't be made just for us. They're not made for just for us anymore. Sure. They have to continue. They have to be made for a younger generation. That's just the nature of this type of creation.
It looks like they've got this open road, but I think they've also got a road that reminds me of the cycles in the Tron video game. It's an open road until you realize it's just a box. And I think there's a little bit of writing themselves in a box, because the multiverse does allow you to zig and zag. But if you're a writer brought in, you're going to get like now 30 films in the rearview mirror and 24 series in a couple of years. And they all have to be interconnected, and they all have to be part of the same MCU universe, even though there's a multiverse in that. I think it's going to send a lot of screenwriters to drink, if it hasn't already. A lot of directors to pull out their hair and quit.
Well, here's a cheat that the MCU could use and probably will use. They can introduce something called Secret Wars and blow it all up and start all over again, just like DC and their Crisis.
Well, that could be what they're thinking of for X-Men. Maybe they have not cracked the nut on how to really, because if you think about it, how can you just start mutants? You're going to say that they all were hiding for all these years, that Charles Xavier and Eric Lencher were hiding during that Nick Fury didn't have these people on their radar. And if he did, why did we never hear about them until now? So, they had a hard time kind of retconning Captain Marvel into the MCU. There were a few things when you watch that film like, oh, wait a minute.
Wait, she's this essentially nuclear warhead that you kept a secret during Ultron? During Loki? Come on.
Yeah. Well, the multiverse is here to stay, and both DC and Marvel have, to your point, figured out a way to keep all of these iterations, that we could see sequels to Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, and it's not going to impact or be held accountable if it doesn't connect to, Robert Pattinson's Batman. Because, there's multiple animated versions. I just think at some point, I guess it comes down to who owns it. And if Disney sells Marvel down the road, God forbid, then all going to... Let me just ask you one last question. I'm going to drag this out. What do you think they need to correct in all of the MCU?
Okay.
You've got 2 minutes.
I got 2 minutes. Okay. So what I want to see corrected is how they treated certain characters in regards to mutants. I don't like the fact that in the entire MCU, there was never any mentions of mutants. They were called miracles, or mutants just didn't exist. And I think that's probably going to be hard to correct simply because we've gone, 11, 12 years, no mention of mutants. Now they bought the rights back to the X-Men, and somehow they have to shoehorn them in. They could simply say that, there were always mutants, but we just, to your point, they were hiding, which I find that's kind of bullshit. But I understand why they would have to do it that way. So I think, honestly, we're not going to get the correction that will be clean. That's what I anticipate. The Incredible Hulk film. I actually enjoyed the film, but we have a different Hulk. We have Edward Norton as a Hulk. They can just simply say, that movie? Oh, no, that was a different universe. Mark Ruffalo was always a Hulk. You just didn't see him.
I think it's a great also gimmick for, just the Loki series. Like if they wanted to have him pop in on a scene in season 2 and some say they get Edward Norton back. Yeah. And they could do that. They could do that. So it does. I think maybe I'm being a little harsh that it does add some creative freedom to go back into those areas. And obviously a lot of this was introduced in Spider-Man Into the Snyderverse, right. Which we get a sequel to. So,
well, one thing they have to get absolutely right, and I'm firm on this because I am a hardcore fanboy about this. The Fantastic Four must be right. And no John Krasinski. I don't care what the fanboys are saying. He ain't Mr. Fantastic. Send your hate mail to John at theexpandeduniverse.com.
We got a lot of hate tweets from someone named Kimberly Hunt, who looks an awful lot like Mary Poppins. Why we were bagging on John Krasinski. Well, thank you to our listeners, both openly geeky and closeted geeky, for joining us on this expanded universe journey. This has been John H.H., and just with me has been S'more, and what a delightful conversation it's been, Mr. S'more.
Yes, John, this was awesome. Love talking about stuff like this. And of course, we're going to be talking about stuff like this all the time.
I think 2022 is going to have a lot more revisiting of the multiverse conversations.
I hope so. And remember that this is your safe space to talk about all things geeky and where you could get your geek on.
Geek out!
Geek out! That was for Doc.
Oh, God. Tinnitus. I've got tinnitus. Thank you for geeking out with us on the Expanded Universe. And be sure to subscribe to the Cinema Craptaculus channel, available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, anywhere you pod. Our universe has indeed expanded, as each week it's a brand new Cinema Craptaculus show, such as B-Sides with Adam, Dave, and Tara, Terror Tunnel with Stephanie and her horror co-hosts, The Expanded Universe with the Geeks, John H.H., Doc, and S'more, Real Debates with Dave, Adam, JDH, and some surprise guests, and of course our flagship, Cinema Craptaculus with Dave, John, and Stephanie. And you can find more fun content at cinemacraptaculus.com. And yeah, follow us on social media. We're Cinema Craptaculus on Facebook, and on Twitter and Instagram, we're at Craptaculus. That is a load of crap. And you know what? There's no such thing as too much crap in your life.